The air at Forward Operating Base Shank hung heavy with the metallic tang of rust and the damp chill of concrete, a scent that mingled with the faint, earthy breath of the Hindu Kush rising beyond our perimeter. It was 1:34, the witching hour of our night watch, when the world seemed to hold its breath. The base itself was a fragile construct, a patchwork of hastily assembled shelters and guard towers that creaked under the weight of the wind, their metal frames more reminiscent of a target than a sanctuary. 3 months prior, we had arrived in September, a unit of 12 hardened by training but unprepared for the isolation that would define our days. The landscape stretched endlessly, a mosaic of rocky outcrops and dry creek beds, its silence broken only by the occasional howl of the wind or the distant rumble of a supply convoy. Yet, as November descended, a new presence emerged, insidious and uninvited, threading through the darkness with sounds that defied the natural order. It began with whispers, faint and elusive, carried on the wind like the ghosts of voices long silenced. At first, we attributed them to the mountain's acoustics, a known trick of the terrain that bent the cries of wildlife into something almost human. Perhaps it was a jackal's cry distorted by the echoes, or the rustle of scrub vegetation caught in a gust. But as the nights grew colder, the sounds evolved, low, murmured conversations in languages none of us could identify, their cadences overlapping with a rhythm that suggested intent rather than chance. The words were indistinct, a babble of tongues that slipped through our comprehension. Yet the pattern was undeniable, as if multiple groups conversed just beyond our sight. Then came the laughter, a high-pitched, jagged sound that sliced through the stillness like broken glass, lasting perhaps 3 seconds before fading into the void. It was not the laughter of joy or camaraderie, but a hollow mimicry, a sound stripped of humanity, designed to unsettle. Each night, its origin shifted, sometimes so close it seemed to brush the wire, other times echoing from valleys miles distant, a phantom chorus that taunted our vigilance. Beside me, Daniel, a 22-year-old private with a freckled face that made him appear younger than his years, stood rigid, his rifle gripped so tightly that his knuckles glowed white under the eerie green cast of our night vision goggles. His youth belied his experience, a mere 6 months in the field, yet the past weeks had worn him thin. Every shadow cast by the moonless night became a potential threat, every distant rustle a reason to swing his weapon toward the empty desert. His jittery energy was a stark contrast to my own attempt at stoicism, a facade I clung to as the sounds grew bolder. "You hear that?" he whispered, his voice a fragile thread lost amid the hum of generators, the faint crackle of radio traffic from the communications bunker, and the rhythmic thud of boots on metal walkways. I nodded, my stomach twisting with a dread that had become a constant companion. The laughter had returned, closer this time, its source elusive yet deliberate. I offered a weak suggestion of locals, though the lie tasted of ash. Our outpost, situated 40 miles from the nearest village, was a deliberate choice. Isolated for strategic advantage, its rugged terrain a deterrent even to the Taliban during winter. No reasonable soul would traverse these mountains after dark, especially not in the bone-chilling cold. Yet the voices persisted, a relentless serenade from midnight until the first light of dawn pierced the horizon. Our squad leader, Kyle Anderson, a 32-year-old career soldier whose steely resolve had been tempered by deployments across continents, took the disturbances seriously enough to order daily patrols. At 6 a.m. each morning, teams ventured into the areas where we'd heard the voices, their boots crunching against the frostbitten ground, their eyes scanning for any sign of life. They returned with nothing but the weight of unanswered questions. No footprints etched into the sand, no remnants of campfires, no evidence that anyone had breached the emptiness. Kyle's calm demeanor masked a growing unease. I saw it in the way he positioned himself during evening briefings, always facing the door as if expecting an intruder, one hand hovering near his sidearm with a readiness that spoke of instinct over protocol. James Rodriguez, a 28-year-old corporal whose discipline had been a bedrock of our unit, began shunning night watches, volunteering for daylight shifts with a fervor that bordered on desperation. His usual stoicism had cracked, replaced by a haunted look that lingered in his eyes. Daniel, too, sought refuge, requesting a reassignment to kitchen duty to escape the darkness. A plea Kyle denied with a sympathetic nod, but no reprieve. The unit teetered on the brink, our collective sanity fraying under the weight of an unseen adversary that seemed to know our every weakness. One night, as I scanned the rocky outcrop to our northeast with a practiced eye, Daniel's voice shattered my focus. "Movement," he said, his rifle trained on a spot where the shadows coalesced into something indistinct. I activated my thermal scope, the landscape blooming into a surreal tapestry of green and black, heat signatures standing out against the cooler background. Yet no warmth registered, just the cold embrace of stone and the empty expanse of ground. Daniel insisted it was human-sized, moving behind the ridge with a purpose, but my equipment betrayed no life. "Goats, maybe?" I suggested, recalling the occasional wanderings of wild herds through the region, their heat signatures sometimes confusing at a distance. But Daniel, seasoned enough to recognize common wildlife, shook his head, his certainty a quiet challenge. The radio crackled with Kyle's voice, a lifeline from the command bunker. "Tower 2, status report." "All clear," I replied, adding the possibility of animal movement to the northeast. "Maintain watch and report any changes," he ordered, his tone steady but laced with an undercurrent of caution. 3 more hours stretched before us, a gauntlet of phantom sounds and shifting shadows that tested our endurance. The timing of these disturbances, always after dark, always from strategic points that forced us to split our attention, felt too precise, too calculated, as if designed to erode our resolve. Command dismissed our reports as the byproduct of deployment stress, a standard response to anomalies that didn't fit their tidy threat assessments, but the truth gnawed at me. Something was out there, studying us, learning our patterns with a predator's patience. 3 weeks later, the sounds had metastasized, a cacophony of whispers and laughter that haunted our every patrol. Daniel and I trudged through the frozen terrain, the November cold a relentless intruder that seeped through our layered gear, our breaths crystallizing in the green-tinted world of night vision goggles. The base shrank to a fragile circle of light cast by our guard towers, the generators hum a mechanical heartbeat against the vast darkness that stretched beyond. 3 months of deployment had taught us that the mountains held sounds differently after sunset, carrying voices and laughter from impossible distances, bending the night into a labyrinth of echoes. The whispers began at midnight, a ritualistic onset that had become our unwelcome clock. But on this night, they were quieter, almost subdued, as if whatever lurked beyond was waiting for a signal, biding its time with a hunter's restraint. Daniel, drawn for night watch duty alongside me, moved with a weariness that had etched itself into his frame. He had lost weight, his face sharpening under the night vision's glow, his hands trembling slightly when he thought I wasn't watching. The kid held it together during daylight hours, his freckled features masking the toll, but the darkness had burrowed under his skin, a parasite feeding on his courage. Kyle, recognizing the strain, had begun rotating watch assignments more frequently, a smart leadership move to prevent burnout, yet it also meant we were all growing accustomed to the pattern, learning to anticipate the timing and locations where the sounds emerged. This night felt different, though, the air thicker with an unspoken tension. The usual whispered conversations started as expected, but their volume was muted, a deliberate hush that suggested anticipation rather than retreat. Daniel stopped abruptly, raising a hand for silence, his silhouette frozen against the green landscape. I stilled beside him, listening past the wind's whistle through the rocks, the distant generator noise, and the occasional crackle of radio traffic from the command bunker. Then I heard it, a woman's voice, clear and distinct in English, cutting through the murmurs like a knife. "Help me, please, someone help me." The sound was so out of place, so jarringly human amid the alien whispers, that it made my stomach drop. Daniel's breathing quickened, his goggles scanning the northeast where the voice originated. Approximately 200 meters away among the boulder field we'd patrolled dozens of times. The desperation in her cries was palpable, raw fear laced with exhaustion and a tremor of pain, a plea that tugged at the deepest instincts honed by years of military service. Yet the location screamed impossibility. This area had been cleared for months, its rugged terrain a deterrent to civilians, especially an American woman alone in the dead of night. "We have to check that out," Daniel urged, his voice tight with urgency, his protective streak flaring. I held him back, my mind racing through the logistics. No one should be out here. No aid worker, no lost soul, not in this frozen wilderness. Her voice came again, closer now, mingled with sobbing that carried a visceral edge, each plea a hook in our resolve. I keyed my mic to radio, Kyle, but static swallowed the call, a wall of electronic noise that suggested either equipment failure or interference. The radio had been functional an hour ago during our last check-in, yet now it offered nothing but a distorted hum. The woman's voice persisted, growing more desperate. "Please, I can see your lights. Help me." Daniel's eyes widened behind his goggles, his resolve hardening. "We can't ignore her," he insisted, and despite every warning bell clanging in my head, my training demanded action. I relented, stipulating caution. "Stay close, watch the flanks, and if anything feels wrong, we fall back immediately." We moved toward the sound, weapons ready, the base's mechanical heartbeat fading into the distance as the boulder field loomed ahead. The terrain transformed under night vision, its jagged rocks and shadowed crevices painted in familiar green tones that felt almost alien, a landscape both known and unknowable. Her sobs guided us, each cry pulling Daniel faster, his compassion overriding the caution that had kept us alive for months. I scanned the shadows between the boulders, every survival instinct I'd developed over 3 months screaming that this situation was wrong. Fundamentally, irreparably wrong. The ground showed no tracks, the frozen earth and scattered stones obscuring any sign. Yet the voice grew clearer, a beacon drawing us deeper into the field. We navigated the natural corridor formed by 2 massive boulders, the sound bouncing off the stone surfaces, creating a disorienting echo that made pinpointing the source a challenge. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable. Raw human fear mixed with exhaustion and what sounded like genuine physical pain. A cry that cut through any rational analysis of why the situation should be impossible. Then we found her, curled in a small depression between the rocks, completely naked and shivering violently in the freezing air. The sight hit me like a physical blow, so unexpected and wrong that my mind struggled to process it. Her long, dark hair fell across her face and shoulders, partially concealing her features, but the pale skin visible through my night vision equipment glowed with an unnatural clarity. She was curled into herself, her body trembling with violent spasms that suggested both cold and terror, her form a stark contrast to the barren stone. As we approached, her head snapped up, and she cried out in what sounded like pure relief. "Thank God! Please help me." She reached toward us with both hands, her movements weak but urgent, the terror in her voice clear and immediate, a raw edge that silenced any doubt about the reality of her distress. Daniel moved forward without hesitation, already shrugging off his jacket before I could stop him. Military training dictated checking for threats before aiding, but the sight of someone so obviously in need triggered every protective instinct he possessed. "It's okay," he said, his voice gentle yet loud enough to carry over the wind. "We're Americans, you're safe now." He draped the jacket over her shoulders, helping her sit up against the boulder, his movements careful and deliberate. I stayed back a few steps, my weapon ready, my eyes scanning the area around the depression for any sign of how she'd arrived or what might have happened. The ground showed no obvious tracks leading to this spot, though the frozen earth and scattered rocks made reading signs difficult even with proper equipment. Her position suggested she had collapsed here, a victim of exhaustion rather than a deliberate choice. She pulled the jacket tight around herself, her shivering subsiding slightly, and looked up at Daniel with an expression of gratitude mixed with lingering fear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking almost as much as her body. "I thought I was going to die out there." I moved closer, keeping my weapon at the ready, my eyes continuing to sweep our surroundings. The tactical part of my mind cataloged details automatically. No obvious wounds, no blood, no signs of restraints or recent violence. Yet finding an American woman, naked and alone in the Afghan mountains during the coldest part of the night, raised questions that demanded answers. "What's your name?" Daniel asked, crouching beside her while maintaining a respectful distance, his concern palpable. "Sarah," she said, pulling the jacket tighter. "I'm so cold. How long were you out here?" He pressed, his voice soft but insistent. "We need to get you back to our base. Can you walk?" She nodded, though the movement looked unsteady, her voice trembling as she replied, "I think so. I've been running for hours, maybe longer. I lost track of time." I stepped forward, keeping my voice calm but direct, my suspicions simmering beneath the surface. "Sarah, how did you get here? What happened to you?" She looked up at me, her eyes catching the green glow of my night vision equipment, and for a moment her expression seemed to shift, becoming more composed, more alert than someone in her condition should be. The change was fleeting, so brief I might have imagined it, but it lingered in my mind. "They took me 3 days ago," she said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Local militants, I think. I was with a humanitarian aid group working in the villages east of here. They grabbed me during a supply run and brought me to some kind of camp in the mountains." Her story aligned with known risks. Aid workers operated throughout the region, and kidnappings by local groups for ransom or political leverage were a constant threat. The details sounded plausible. Militants often used hidden cave systems in the higher elevations, and her escape during a guard's lapse fit the narrative of a desperate flight. But something about her presence here, in this specific location, bothered me in ways I couldn't articulate. A nagging dissonance that clashed with the physical evidence of her ordeal. "How did you escape?" I asked, my tone probing. Sarah's jaw tightened, and I could see her forcing herself to recall details that were obviously painful. "They kept me tied up most of the time, but tonight the guard fell asleep. I managed to work free from the ropes and ran. I just kept running through the mountains until I couldn't go any further." Daniel helped her stand, and she leaned heavily against him for support, her contact seeming natural for someone seeking stability after trauma. But I noticed how quickly she turned toward him specifically, her movements unsteady yet practiced, positioning herself to appear vulnerable while maintaining physical contact with the person most likely to protect her. "Where were you being held?" I asked, my suspicion deepening. "I'm not sure exactly," she replied, her voice wavering slightly. "Somewhere higher up in the mountains, maybe 5 or 6 miles from here. It was dark when I ran, and I just followed the slope downward." The explanation made sense on paper. Militants favored cave systems in the higher elevations, and a fleeing captive would naturally head downhill toward potential help. But 6 miles of rough terrain in darkness, naked and barefoot, seemed an impossible feat for someone in her apparent condition. Her balance improved as we began the return trek, her steps steadier than expected, and she accepted Daniel's help with a gratitude that felt rehearsed. I walked point, my weapon ready, my mind wrestling with the inconsistencies. Her controlled breathing, her lack of fear, the way she never once looked back toward the area where we'd found her, showing no concern about being followed or tracked by her supposed captors. Instead, her attention remained fixed on the base's lights, her focus unervingly precise, like someone who had studied our position long enough to understand its layout and defenses rather than a desperate civilian stumbling upon salvation by accident. We reached the perimeter wire, the familiar shape of FOB Shank emerging from the darkness, guard towers and prefab structures outlined against the star-filled sky, a mechanical buzz of generators and the warm glow of interior lights offering a semblance of safety after the strangeness of the boulder field. Sarah moved steadily between Daniel and me, her borrowed jacket pulled tight around her shoulders, her demeanor shifting from vulnerability to a quiet confidence that unsettled me. Kyle must have heard our approach, for he emerged from the command bunker, James close behind, both men stopping dead when they saw Sarah. Their expressions morphed from routine alertness to complete shock in an instant, a visceral reaction that mirrored my own initial disbelief. "What the hell?" Kyle's voice carried clearly across the small distance, his leadership instincts kicking in as he processed the anomaly. James took a step backward, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm before training reasserted control, though his face remained pale with tension. "Found her in the rocks about 200 meters northeast," I called out as we passed through the gate, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. She escaped from militants who've been holding her for 3 days. Kyle's gaze sharpened, his mind already calculating the tactical implications. An American civilian at our isolated outpost meant radio calls to command, extraction protocols, and a mountain of paperwork that would consume days. He pointed toward the main shelter, his tone shifting to the calm, professional cadence he used during crises. Get her inside where it's warm. James, grab some water and whatever food we have ready, and find some clean clothes from the emergency supplies. Sarah looked up at Kyle with an expression of pure gratitude, her eyes wide and trusting, a mask that seemed to fit too perfectly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I can't believe I found you out here. You're safe now," Kyle replied, though I could see him.